Robert stayed on as advisor for 6 months. Leonard retired immediately. Marcus reported to me now. I didn't fire him on day one. I scheduled a team meeting for Thursday. All consultants, all staff. I introduced myself as the new owner, outlined my vision, announced immediate changes. The Strategic Growth Acceleration Programme was being discontinued, effective immediately. Existing clients would be transitioned to standard advisory services, no new sales. I'd be conducting individual performance reviews with each consultant over the next month. The meeting lasted 35 minutes. Marcus didn't speak during it. Afterward, he sent me an email requesting a one-on-one. I scheduled it for the following week. When we met, he asked about his role going forward. I said I was evaluating the organisational structure. I'd have clarity within 60 days. He asked if his position was secure. I said everyone's performance would be assessed against documented standards and client feedback. He looked uncomfortable. I ended the meeting. Over the next month, I met with every consultant, reviewed their work, gathered client feedback. Marcus's performance was mediocre. His client relationships were transactional. His delivery quality was inconsistent. He'd been coasting on the work of others, including mine. I also discovered something in the legal files. The intellectual property assignment clause in my contractor agreement was ambiguous. It stated that deliverables created for specific client projects belonged to the firm. But my framework hadn't been created for a specific client. I'd developed it independently and offered it to the firm as a potential service offering. The firm had used it without a clear IP transfer agreement. I consulted with an attorney. They confirmed the framework's ownership was disputed at best. I didn't pursue it legally. I just stopped using it entirely. I rebuilt the firm's service offerings from scratch. Different methodologies, different frameworks, all clearly documented and owned by Kendrick Advisory. 60 days after the acquisition, I restructured the team. Marcus's role was eliminated. I offered him a different position, junior consultant, 20% pay reduction, no management responsibilities. He declined. He resigned 2 weeks later. I didn't replace him. I promoted 2 of the senior consultants who'd been doing the actual client work. I hired 3 new people, strong backgrounds, clear performance expectations. I reached out to former clients who'd left during the decline. I explained the changes, new ownership, new focus, return to quality delivery. 4 of them came back. I stabilized the revenue, improved margins, rebuilt the culture. 18 months after the acquisition, the firm was profitable again. The seller note payments were on schedule, the equity partner was satisfied. The team was performing. I never told anyone the full story of why I'd bought the firm. When people asked, I said I'd seen an opportunity. I'd had the capital and expertise. The timing was right. All of that was true. What I didn't mention was that the opportunity had been created by their own mistakes. They'd taken credit for work they didn't understand. They'd undervalued the person who'd created it. They'd assumed I had no leverage. They'd been wrong about all 3. The framework I'd developed was still saved on my personal drive. Original files, original presentation, original documentation. I never used it again in that form. But the principles behind it, strategic positioning, value creation, patient execution, I used those every day, just in ways they never saw coming.
My contract was terminated for poor performance and failure to deliver client value. 6 months later, I completed the acquisition of the firm at 42% below market valuation. The purchase agreement cited underperforming client relationships and declining revenue as justification for the reduced price. I found out about my termination on a Wednesday afternoon. My boss, Marcus, called me into a video conference at 4 p.m. He said the firm was restructuring its contractor relationships. He said my performance hadn't met expectations. He said they were ending my contract effective immediately. I was Alison Wright, strategy consultant, independent contractor. I'd worked with Kendrick Advisory for 3 years. I asked which deliverables had been unsatisfactory. He said it was a pattern, not one specific project. I asked if I could see the performance documentation. He said it wasn't necessary. The decision was final. I asked about my final payment. He said they process everything within 30 days per the contract terms. The call ended at 4:17. I opened my contractor agreement, found the performance clause, section 11.2. Either party may terminate this agreement with 30 days written notice or immediately for cause. Cause includes failure to meet documented performance standards or client dissatisfaction. I'd never received written notice. I'd never received documentation of performance issues. I'd never received client complaints. I opened my project files. Over 3 years, I'd led 42 client engagements. 38 had resulted in contract renewals or expansions. 4 had completed as scoped with positive client feedback. I had every client satisfaction survey, every performance review, every project closure report. All positive. I also had something else. 18 months ago, I'd developed a client acquisition framework, a methodology for identifying and closing mid-market consulting opportunities. I documented it, presented it internally, recommended the firm adopt it as a proprietary offering. Marcus had reviewed it, said it needed refinement, said he'd develop it further with the team. 6 months later, the firm launched a new service line, Strategic Growth Acceleration Program. The methodology was identical to mine. Same framework, same process steps, same diagnostic tools. My name wasn't mentioned. I wasn't credited. I wasn't compensated. I'd saved everything. My original presentation, my framework documentation, the internal email trail. But I hadn't escalated it then. I'd been focused on client work. I'd assumed it was a misunderstanding. Now I was terminated. I closed my laptop. I didn't email Marcus. I didn't file a complaint. I didn't demand an explanation. I made 3 phone calls instead. The first call was to my financial advisor. I had investments, liquid assets from 15 years of consulting work, diversified portfolio, no debt. I asked her to calculate my available capital for a business acquisition in the $2 to $5 million range. She said she'd run the numbers and call me back. The second call was to a private equity contact I'd worked with on a client project 2 years prior. I asked if his firm was still looking at consulting sector opportunities in Southeast Asia. He said they were, always. I said I might have a lead, a mid-market advisory firm, underperforming, potentially undervalued. He asked which firm. I said I'd send details once I'd done preliminary analysis. The third call was to a client, the CEO of a manufacturing company I'd advised for 18 months. I asked if he was satisfied with the work I'd done. He said absolutely. The operational restructuring I'd designed had increased their margins by 12%. I asked if he'd be willing to put that in writing. He said of course. He asked why. I said I was exploring new opportunities and wanted updated references. He said he'd send something by end of week. I thanked him and ended the call. Then I started researching. I pulled up Kendrick Advisory's public filings. They were a private limited company, required annual financial disclosure in Singapore. I downloaded the last 3 years of accounts. Revenue had grown steadily until 18 months ago. Then it plateaued. Then it started declining. Operating margin had compressed. Client retention had dropped. I cross-referenced the timeline. The decline started exactly when they launched the Strategic Growth Acceleration Program. The service line built on my framework.
I opened LinkedIn. Searched for Kendrick Advisory employees. 3 senior consultants had left in the past year. One had been there for 6 years, another for 4. I reached out to the one I knew best, a woman named Priya who'd left 8 months ago. I asked if she'd be open to a coffee chat. She responded within an hour. "Absolutely. I heard what happened. Let's talk." We met 2 days later, a cafe in the financial district. Priya told me the firm was struggling. After they'd launched the new service line, they'd won several clients, but the delivery had been inconsistent. The methodology wasn't being applied correctly. Client satisfaction scores had dropped. Marcus had tried to standardize the approach, but the team didn't understand the underlying framework. They were following scripts without grasping the strategic logic. Renewals had fallen. New client acquisition had slowed. Revenue projections were missing targets. The 2 founding partners were considering options. One wanted to shut down the new service line. The other wanted to invest more in training. They were divided. The firm was stuck. I asked if she knew whether they'd consider selling. She said she'd heard rumours, nothing concrete, but the partners were both in their late 50s. Neither had succession plans. I thanked her, paid for coffee, left. That evening, my financial advisor called back. I had access to approximately 1.8 million in liquid capital, more if I liquidated certain long-term holdings, but that would take time. She asked what I was considering. I said a potential acquisition. Small consulting firm. I'd need to assess valuation first. She said to keep her posted. I spent the next week building a financial model. I estimated Kendrick Advisory's current value based on their revenue, client base, and market comparables. Given the declining performance, I projected a valuation between 3.2 and 4 million. If I could negotiate down to 2.8 or lower, I could structure a deal. Part cash, part seller financing, possibly bring in a minority equity partner. I refined the model, ran scenarios, stress-tested assumptions. Then I waited. I didn't contact Marcus. I didn't contact the firm. I focused on my own client work with other companies. I had 3 active projects. I delivered them all successfully, built my independent track record, secured references. 2 months after my termination, I saw a job posting. Kendrick Advisory was hiring. Senior consultant role. The description emphasized expertise in client acquisition and business development. They were trying to replace what they'd lost when they let me go. I didn't apply. 3 months after termination, Priya messaged me. "Heard from a former colleague. Kendrick might be exploring a sale. One of the partners wants out. Thought you'd want to know." I thanked her. I waited another week. Then I sent an email, not to Marcus, to Robert Kendrick, one of the founding partners. Subject: Confidential Inquiry, Strategic Partnership Opportunity. Body: Mr. Kendrick, I hope this message finds you well. I previously worked with your firm as a contractor and have maintained strong regard for Kendrick Advisory's client relationships and market position. I understand the firm may be evaluating strategic options. I would be interested in discussing a potential partnership or acquisition opportunity. I have both industry experience and access to capital. I would welcome a confidential conversation if you're open to exploring this. Best regards, Alison Wright. I sent it on a Tuesday evening. Wednesday morning, I received a response. Miss Wright, thank you for reaching out. This is well timed. I would be interested in a preliminary discussion. Are you available for a call this week? Robert Kendrick. We spoke on Friday. Robert was direct. The firm was underperforming. His business partner, Leonard, wanted to retire. Robert was willing to continue, but not alone. They'd discussed bringing in a managing partner. They'd discussed a full sale. They hadn't decided. I asked about their valuation expectations. He said they'd had a preliminary assessment done, $3.5 million. I said I'd need to see detailed financials before making an offer. He said he'd prepare a data room, confidential access, standard NDA. We agreed to next steps. I signed the NDA the following week, accessed the financial data room. I spent 2 weeks analysing everything: revenue by client, margin by service line, pipeline projections, employee costs, overhead. The Strategic Growth Acceleration Programme was hemorrhaging value. High delivery costs, low client satisfaction, minimal renewals. Without it, the firm would be worth more. I built my offer. $2.6 million. Structured as $1.2 million cash, $1.4 million seller note over 4 years. Contingent on me becoming managing partner with full operational control. I'd shut down the underperforming service line, focus on core advisory services, rebuild client relationships. I included a turnaround plan, detailed, 30 pages. I submitted the offer in month 4. Robert and Leonard took 3 weeks to respond. They came back with a counter, $2.9 million, same structure. They wanted slightly better terms on the seller note. I countered at 2.7, better interest rate, shorter payback period. We negotiated for another 2 weeks. We settled at $2.75 million, 1.3 cash, 1.45 seller note, 5-year term. I brought in a minority equity partner for $250,000, a former client who believed in my capabilities. I closed the funding, finalized legal documentation, structured the transaction. 6 months and 2 weeks after my termination, I signed the purchase agreement. The transaction closed on a Wednesday. I became the owner and managing partner of Kendrick Advisory.